Hey, thank you for joining me. So today we're going to be doing something new. I'm actually going to be distressing this and then top coating it live. So I never do live top coats because they're kind of tricky, but we're going to try it tonight and see how it goes, hopefully well. So thank you for joining me. Please let me know what questions you have. Type them in. If you're watching on the replay, thank you. Feel free to comment. I can still see all those comments and I'll let you know whatever you're, respond. But I'm Kelly with Captiva Home and we're gonna get started. So today we have already painted this piece in General Finishes Milk Paint in Persian Blue. So that process went really nicely. It laid on so smooth, it is now settled and dried. And now we're on to the distressing. So distressing can be a little bit tricky sometimes. You wanna start a little bit lighter, the lighter hand, and then go back and address, and then you can do some of like the deeper distressing if you choose to. I tend to go for like a natural look, so I really like to see the distress just a little bit to highlight the edges, and then like where you'd see normal use. So whenever I'm talking about distressing, I always want to like picture like how would this piece actually be used. If you're opening the cupboards, you're probably gonna like ding your fingernails on the handles a little bit, but you're not gonna like impact here. So a lot of folks will take sandpaper and they go too heavy of a grit, in my opinion. These are all my opinions, so you might have a completely different thought process and aesthetic. Awesome. But I am not a huge fan of when you see like one spot that's rubbed really hard, like in the middle of the panel. And you see the bare wood just like right there, and then like right there. I don't think that's natural, so that's not a look that I prefer. So I'm going to teach you how to achieve kind of a natural distress. So what I like to use are these handy sanding pads. So we use these during the prep video. These are my favorite. We are going to add them to the website too. They are on our Amazon shop, but I think that's a little tricky. So just adding them to the website might be a little easier for everyone to find. So with distressing, I recommend starting with a higher grit and then working your way back if need be. So what I'm going to do is start with a 320. So this is pretty fine, and then it will also dull pretty significantly. So I keep these forever. They last a really long time. And I have some that are really smooth, and that's probably more like a 500 grit that it's functioning as. So I'm going to start with this, and then I might do something that's a little bit softer. Perhaps. But all you do is, I like to hold a flat hand, and then we're just going to rub it everywhere to make sure that we knock down any like little bumps. So what distressing does is it smooths out your finish. So if you had any brush strokes, this would help smooth them down a bit so that they're going to be less noticeable. If you have any issues, so if you have any like little lint that's settled on your piece, or really anything, and it still feels a little rough, doing a light distress is going to help smooth it down, and then when you top coat it, you're going to have a much smoother surface to work with. So it's going to look like a much better finish. And if you have details, this is really where distressing comes to be fun. So this is a pretty plain dresser. There's not a lot going on, not a lot of details. We do have some edges, but like a piece like this, it's really fun to distress because you have all these gorgeous details that'll just start popping out, and you'll start to see some wood tones underneath. And then you can lightly go over to expose it and then choose to do a little bit more. So these pieces with a ton of detail I find to be more fun for distressing. But this one we can do a light distress, and it's just going to make it look a little more authentic, a little more lived in, as opposed to a piece that was, perfect and just done. And another tip, when you do a light distress, now if your client, or if you're using it in a little while and it gets a little ding, it looks intentional instead of like an issue. So if you have a perfect finish, super smooth, super shiny, and then you have a ding, it's noticeable. It looks like your piece is not so good anymore. Whereas if you have a light distress and then you notice a little more, like if it gets a chip or if someone's rough with it, it will look more intentional. It's not going to mar your look as much. So keep that in mind. And it will also just, it helps it look a little live-in. So I like that. So anyway, 320 sanding pad. You could also use 220. You could use regular sandpaper if you choose to. Some paints you can do a wet distress and just use like a washcloth, like soon after it dries. But the General Finishes milk paint does dry pretty hard, pretty quickly. We're gonna get a little bit of sanding dust. You should wear a mask, so let's say that. Just like a dust mask like this is ideal. That's all you need. And then I like to do a light sand all over and kind of see what just naturally wants to pop out. Can you see that? No. Let me show you. So, that little bit of a sand, and again, always with the grain of your piece. Can you see that? Yes. So, that is just a little bit. I like to come in and hit the corners again and kind of notice where your hand naturally falls. And then just go back over that a few times. And really, that's it. Make sure it looks consistent. Consistency is where you kind of step up to have what looks to be a professional finish, is when you have, you know, a consistent look everywhere. It looks a lot more professional, whether you are a professional or not. That's always a signal to me about the quality of work. So like this doesn't take a long time, but it does add a lot of character. And so this piece was pretty orange underneath, so it's actually gonna be really nice to see the blue come out. I mean, the orange wood tones come out of the blue. Once we top coat it, it will really, it's gonna deepen the color of the paint again, and then kind of activate what's below, and you'll see a lot more wood tones come out. So if I wanted to do more, I could come in and just keep going at it. This is totally a personal preference as to how far you want to go. So we're going to do this part, and then I'm going to show you how I top coat. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I will be happy to answer them and guide you however possible. I'd love to see what kind of projects you guys are creating. Now down here, can you see how that has some details? And it's already dinged up. So that's also another clue as to where you should be distressing when you're using a piece. If it already has some character, it's probably gonna happen again, based on the style of the piece or how it's used. So down here, sure looks like a lot of people kicked it, or tried to put some stuff under here, because it does have some dings. So rather than try to fight that, I'm going to accentuate it a little bit by doing a little heavier distress down there. Anywhere that there's more texture, you'll see more distressing coming through. Down here, it was a little bit rougher wood, so we're going to see some more character there. But this really smooths it out very nicely. So that's always a good thing. Have a nice smooth finish. One thing that's kind of funny when you, I think it's funny, when you start watching people like interact with their furniture, everybody touches it immediately. That's the first thing anyone does when they see a piece of furniture. They kind of like run their hand across it. So taking that time to have a little bit smoother finish is going to help that and make people kind of appreciate the quality right away. So sanding can alter the color of your piece a little bit. You probably can't see too well there, but it does make a little bit of a dusty haze over it. And then once you remove that sanding dust and pop it, it'll come back to the previous finish. Now, if you use too heavy of a grit sandpaper, instead of smoothing it, it's just gonna scratch up the surface. So I try to avoid that. Anything less than 220 is probably not ideal for distressing. I like to stick with this 320 area. I'll do this too. Because you don't want to have scratches. You just want it to look a little bit more. Again, in my opinion. You should also probably be wearing glasses too. That would be the right thing. So now that we have the drawers done, we're going to do the box real quick, and I'll do one side and then we'll get on to top coating. So with this, you know that these areas tend to get marred up. So what I like to do is add that little distress. It's going to define the lines of the piece and then also help it to wear better over time. So just take a minute. The corners are another spot that you definitely want to hit with the distressing because they will be bumped into, dinged against. They get a lot of use and abuse. So definitely corners. If you notice earlier in the process, if your drawers are sticking, this might be a good time to do a little bit more of a distress there to help them glide better. But you should probably address that during your prep work first. That's all looking pretty good. We'll come over here. So this is a nice large flat panel. There's not any details really anywhere. So what I'm just going to do is that quick once over to knock down any high spots. And that'll be it. Again, always going with the grain of the piece. Or if there's no grain, you know, just where the lines of the piece are. You do want to keep a flat hand. If you dig in with your fingers too much, you can actually create like finger lines, and that would not be ideal. You could also use a sanding block. So if you have, if you struggle with your hands, or you just want to get a really nice smooth finish over a flat panel, you could either wrap this around a piece of wood and then use that, or you have, there's also like sanding blocks that you can buy, and those would be available at like Lowe's or Amazon, whatever, and those might be nicer. I find that these pads are really quite comfortable on my hands. So that's one of the other reasons that I like them. All right, so now we need to remove our sanding dust. So if you were to just come back in with a top coat now, you would just be trapping all of that dust that is all over the piece in the top coat, and then that would be gritty and it would not be smooth, probably cause some issues. So you want to remove as much sanding dust as possible. So I like to use these microfiber cloths. They're just cleaning supplies. You can get them anywhere. We have them in the Amazon shop. And then I like to wash them. So that'll wash out all the dust and you can use them for a while. Or there's actually tack cloths as well. So this is a tack cloth that we have from General Finishes. And this is just, I don't know, it's kind of papery. And this will trap the sanding dust and it will not interfere with your water-based finishes. If you use a tack cloth from like Home Depot and they're like super sticky, they work well to trap the dust, but I don't know what the solvent is. It always sticks on my hands. I don't like it. And then it can also interfere with water-based finishes. So you want to be careful about that. I don't recommend using those sticky tack cloths. Instead, use something that's not going to interfere. So all you do is wipe it down. You could also like vacuum it or blow it off with your air compressor. Whatever works. But you see how much dust is on that? That's a lot. So we don't want that in our finish. So you do want to take the time to wipe it down. And whichever one you use is a personal preference. I like these. Dan likes these ones. So whatever. And then wipe it down really well. Make sure that you get into any interior corners like this. So this would be a great spot for some dust to accumulate. So we'll make sure that we get that really well. And then we're on to top coats. So this is sometimes a difficult thing for people. For us too. I mean, we always run into issues on all kinds of stuff. So let's start with what top coat. So top coat is a protective barrier that you put over your paint. Some paints will need it to seal, some just need it for extra protection. It is optional sometimes. So with the General Finishes Milk Paint, it does have a built-in top coat, so you don't have to use anything additional. It'll have about a medium level of durability. So I don't trust that for the tops of dressers. If it was just the base, that would be, in my opinion, probably okay. But the tops take a lot of wear, so I like to make sure that that's really well protected. And then we also do the rest of it just to make sure that we're putting out, you know, a great product. And then if you distress it, then I think you definitely want a top coat because now you've kind of roughed up the surface. It doesn't have its ideal level of strength, so you need to add a top coat in order to bring it back up to the durability that you want. So we use the General Finishes High Performance Top Coat in satin. This is our favorite. This is very popular. It's in our shop. This is a water-based polyacrylic top coat. So it's water-based, it's easy to use. It does dry a little quickly, so you want to move very fast. So once I get into that, I'll show you a few tricks around using the top coat. So that's water-based, pretty easy to use. And then there's also things like traditional polyurethane. So this is an oil-based. This is very common. It's in like Home Depot, Lowe's. This is an oil-based top coat. It can be tricky to use. It can be stinky. You need to use a dedicated brush with this. Do not use your Klingon brush. Klingon brushes are for water-based finishes. You can use it with the General Finishes top coat, but not this because it's oil-based. So you will need mineral spirits to clean up your brush, or you could use something like a foam brush and then just toss it. So that's an option. It's a little more durable than polyacrylic in most cases, but this will amber over time, which is something that a lot of people fight with top coating. They think the top coat has yellowed their piece, especially if it's on white. Sometimes that's true. If you use an oil-based product and you use this, which is a little yellow, little ambered, over a white piece, it's gonna change the color a little bit, make it a little yellow. So that's true. But what more often happens is people don't do the prep work that they should have. So they just jump right in and they start painting, but they don't address the stains that are underneath or the wood tones that are underneath with the tannins that we talked about during the prep process. So when you add the water-based top coat, it just pulls everything up. So if you're using this General Finishes top coat over white and you have a piece with bleed through like this, let me show you. So this is what can happen. See that mark right there? So this was a mahogany piece, and we have used, I think this is a shellac-based primer. I'm gonna say there's one coat on it. So we noticed that this still bled through, even with a shellac-based primer. So we know that we need to treat that before we get into the paint. So if we started painting right away and then started eventually put on our top coat, it would bleed more. We already know that's an issue there. So you need to address the underlying potential stains and then use polyacrylic top coat in order to avoid that yellowing of the top coat. Please let me know if that makes sense. I think it does. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll probably find out pretty soon because it's very frustrating to see bleed through, but it's not necessarily the top coat's fault. It's usually a prep work issue. So there's that. There's also stuff like this. So this is the urethane. They call it a polyurethane. It's actually water-based. So that's a little tricky. So when you're looking at products, the best thing to do, because it's really hard to figure out what everything's actually made with, is look at the cleanup. So the cleanup says soap and water. So that lets you know that it's a water-based product because the soap and water is going to break it down. That's a solvent. That's what you need to know. With this, when you look at it, it says it needs to be cleaned up with the mineral spirits. So we know that that is an oil-based product. If it says denatured alcohol, you know that's a shellac-based product. So just keep that in mind. It's a little trick because a lot of people will use, a lot of brands use names that are a little bit tricky. So what we're using today is the High Performance Top Coat, this one, in satin. And as far as methods of application, that's another question mark for a lot of people. So the best way to get a smooth finish is going to be to spray it. So that would be using something like this 3M AccuSpray gun. So this is a spray gun. It's super easy to use, just a little trigger. This actually has disposable parts, so that's one of the things we like about it. We do clean them and use them for quite a while, but at least we know that if they get clogged up, we can just throw it away and get another one for very, cost effective. So this is actually the paint. Comes in, well, these are the canisters. There's a plastic canister inside that actually contains the paint. This is just a casing, and then you put it on, and that's how you spray. So it's really easy to use. This is a great kind of like middle ground for a spray gun. You do need a compressor, so you'll have to keep that in mind. You do want to use whatever compressor the spray gun that you're looking at needs, because they're all going to be a little different. So figure out what kind of spray gun you'd like, and then get an appropriate compressor if you want to spray. There's a bit of a learning curve, but once you figure that out, it's really fast and you get really good results. So, but if you don't want to spray, you can still do other things. So what we'll do is actually brush it on. So I'll be using my Klingon brush and make sure that I add some extender to add to the open time, because we want this to stay open, to not dry super fast. The polyacrylic tends to dry kind of fast, and that's not ideal for my purposes. I don't like that. A lot of people would if you're trying to recoat things pretty quickly, but I get frustrated with that. So I add up to 10% of the extender, and this is by General Finishes. I'll add it to our website. It should be there soon. And you just put that in your bucket, just like the regular buckets that I use, and then brush it on real quick. So I'll show you once we get there. So that's one way to do it. Another way would be to use like the foam brush. So these are pretty handy. There are different levels of quality. You want to make sure that you have one that's a little bit flexible. If it's too stiff, it just kind of drags things around and it doesn't work well. But it does have a tapered edge, so you can kind of just like, lay it on and drag it quickly. So this is a good way to do it pretty fast. There are different sizes as well, so depending how large your piece is, you might want to use like an inch, or maybe this is a 2-inch. There's also like 3, I think that's as big as I get. So you could use that. A lot of people also like these sponges. So this is just I think they say it's a waxing sponge for like automotive care or something. So here you could actually just wipe it on and try it that way. So that's another option. Other people do things like a fancy thing with a sock. I haven't tried that yet, but other people like that. So you do want to experiment and figure out the application method that you like that's going to achieve the results that you want to see. So what we're going to do today is the Klingon brush. And when you're doing top coats, you want to make sure that you have a larger flat brush. So this is the shorty. This is about a 2-inch head, and it does handle like a flat brush, although it does have a little bit of oval spot there. You could also use your flat. If you use a round brush or one that's too small, you're going to see a lot of lap lines, overlapping lines, and that may not dry down as smooth as you'd like. So keep that in mind. But we're going to start. So we're going to start over here. So I have my high performance top coat in satin. It actually has a fair amount of sheen. So I find that it's like kind of handles a little bit more than most satins do. So what we'll do many times is actually dull it back with a coat of flat after. So that will get us the level of protection that we're looking for, but not super shiny. Because keep in mind, generally, the shinier the surface, the more protected it is. So if you have a flat surface, the durability isn't as great as if you have like a glossy one. So think about like your walls. So if someone spills something or like splashes something on the walls, and it's a glossy wall, you can just kind of wipe it off. With a flat wall, it kind of sinks in. It's harder to get the mess out of there. So it's the same thing with furniture. The shinier it is, the easier it is to, the more durability it has. So with this, I am just laying off on the bucket, and I'm going to do quick strokes. So you don't want to handle it too much. It's one of the secrets with using Journal Finishes polyacrylic or any top coat in general. So be kind of intentional about it. You just want to do a couple lines and then back off. So you do need to use at least 1, probably 2 coats. 3 would be better to get to the optimal level of durability. So even if you miss a spot, like on the flats, if you miss an area, just make sure on the next coat that you hit it really well, instead of trying to go back and alter it, because it sets up pretty quickly. You also need to balance that with something. I lost my train of thought. So again, I'm just moving along the piece. Oh, you don't want to use too much product either. So if you have too much product on there, it's going to drip. You can't see that. But that was just a little drip that I caught. Or it could run or sag, which are all not what we're looking for. So here, I'm just going to start at one edge and brush it off. And can you see how this is deepening the wood tones? This would also happen on stained surfaces. So once you add the top coat, I find that it really solidifies the stain color and makes it pop. So when you add top coat to stain, that's when you see the end result. And then here, gotta be careful. this large flat area can be a challenge. So with this, I'm gonna make sure that I work really fast. My brush is a little bit damp. I actually just cleaned it out. Ideally, if you're gonna be brushing top coats all the time, you wanna have a brush that is dedicated to clear top coats and then brushes for all the colors. Because, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see that, no. Sometimes the color will stay on, you know, the interior of the paintbrush somewhere. So I just washed this out really well, but there's still a little bit of paint in there. So depending what colors you're painting with, that could present an issue. If you have like a white piece and then your brush has a little bit of black in it, that could be a problem when you're trying to use a clear top coat over it. But that's kind of a next level thing. So here we're just doing long, smooth strokes. Again, since the Klingon brushes are so good at leveling, and the General Finishes top coat also wants to self-level, they should combine to see really smooth finishes. If you want even more smooth, you can sand in between coats, which is really ideal, and that would knock down any potential issues as you go. So that's going to help you get a smoother finish, but it's not completely necessary. So that's it for top coat. And I don't know if you're gonna be able to see that, no. But what we did was top coat with the high performance satin top coat from General Finishes. And I used my Klingon brush and I moved around real quick. And that should dry to a nice smooth finish. I'll come back in and do a quick scuff. So that's only using that 320 sanding pad again, or even one that's a little bit used, so it's a little bit finer. And then I will continue to work on this piece and I'll have it to show you soon. So I think that's it. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please let me know what you're working on. And then we'll do a question and answer session. I think that's next week. So please let me know how I can help you, what you're working on, what questions you have, and if you want to see anything else or different, whatever, I'd love to chat with you. So thank you. Have a great night.